Welcome. I'm Barbara Call, Senior Director of Content Operations and Strategy at IDG, and I'll be your host and moderator for today's webcast. Today we'll be talking about policy-based data management on a cloud-scale architecture. I have three speakers joining me today. First up is Kent Christensen, Cloud and Data Center Practice Director at Insight's Cloud and Data Center Transformation Organization. Welcome, Kent.
Thank you, Barbara. Great to be here.
Next up is Dale Hansen, National Technical Partner Manager at NetApp. Welcome, Dale.
Good morning, Barbara. Thanks for having us.
And last but not least, Pierre Guglielmi, Manager of Strategic Global Alliances at Rubrik. Welcome, Pierre.
Thank you. Hi, Barbara.
And so now I'd like to hand things over to Kent to start the presentation. Kent, over to you.
Thank you, Barbara. Appreciate the introduction. Appreciate our speakers. We're going to talk a little bit about, as you mentioned, data management with our partners, NetApp and Rubrik. I'd like to give you, to start off, a brief introduction of Insight, who is sponsoring this. Insight is about a $10 billion company based in the U.S., supports worldwide operations. They're actually a bunch of facets to Insight. One is a large supply chain organization, a connected workforce organization, which has been pretty popular in the first half of 2020 as we try to connect our workforces. We're going to focus in today a bit on the cloud and data center transformation. That's where we architect solutions to meet our clients' needs. And then digital innovation is really about helping transform applications and workloads. So with that, I'll drill down a little bit into what cloud and data center transformation is. As you saw in the previous slide, some of this was organic growth and some of this was through acquisitions. And so cloud and data center transformation today is about a $2.6 billion organization or subset of Insight. By itself, it would be a top 5 data center and cloud integrator globally. And one of the things you'll see out of there is it's heavy in the services, it's heavy in technical client-facing teammates, but the other part of it is it's very dedicated to architected solutions. And so what we're going to talk about today is an architected solution with NetApp and Rubrik on doing data management. So as we transition to looking at data in digital transformation, I think when people, and it's a hot topic, how do I do digital transformation? How do I go digital, et cetera? And we like to differentiate two things. One, digital and application modernization is really about changing the application. Am I doing AI? Am I doing machine learning? Am I doing analytics? Things like that. That's transformation of the application itself. In order to support that, we believe you have to transform the modern data center platform. And so today, what we're going to be talking about a lot about is, again, NetApp, well known for primary storage in data centers and cloud, et cetera. Rubrik, a leading data protection solution, and those are part of the platform versus the application, if you would. Now, as we start to talk about data, we need to understand that there's a lot of attributes about data, and some of them are you just don't move it around easily, and so that's really a lot of the subject matter today. But when we think about cloud strategies, one of the beliefs we have is that where your data is going to drive your strategy. If you have massive amounts of data at the edge, you can't bring them up to the cloud to get the answer to a question that needs an immediate response, i.e. a car or something like that. So you're going to have to learn to process your data where it is, whether it's in a data center, in the cloud, on the edge, and that's going to drive some of your cloud strategies, et cetera. So when we look at how we provide solutions to organizations, we take a wide view of it. It can't just be storage, although NetApp is clearly a leader in that. It can't just be how do I back up my data, but it needs to be everything. You know, what's my network look like? How's my compute? What am I using for virtualization software, et cetera? You know, what's my security profile? How do I align that to cloud? How do I provide the services across all those? So if you look at this chart, somewhere up at the upper left and transitioning into the storage, that's where we're going to focus the discussion today. How do I look at taking data, my very critical information on my primary storage, and get it to a place where it's safe in case I need to do a restore, and how do I get it to a place where I can have what we'll call compliance copies of that data. So, you know, again, drilling down into data, obviously, it's incredibly important to most organizations. If an organization loses a router or a server, that's an asset that can easily be replaced. If they lose the data, that can lose confidence in your clients. It can create security issues. People can go to jail if it's done in the wrong way. Data is very important to almost every organization, and most believe that the economy today is really driven on data. When we look at that, obviously we're creating a lot of it. There are attributes of data that you need to think about. One of them is, obviously, we just covered, it's very important to everybody. The second is it's got a lot of weight. You can't move hundreds of terabytes of data from one place to another, even over a very fast network, very quickly. And so that's some of the magic in the solution we're going to talk about, is how do you get data from a primary copy to a secondary copy to a compliance copy efficiently, given the massive quantity of it. The third one is very important, is the temperature of the data. My primary copy probably has very, very high performance requirements. My second copy needs to be restored very quickly, but doesn't have the same performance requirements. And my compliance copy really is a lot cooler, if you would, in that I'm just trying to find a place to keep something safe, and therefore cost becomes a very important component of that. And then finally, the life cycle. So with that, we'll talk a little bit about, there's a lot of ways to do what you might call backup or data protection, et cetera. And in a business continuance, one of them is a disaster recovery. If a primary data center is completely lost, how do I recover that? That's not going to be really the topic today. The topic today is going to be, how do I continue operations, assuming there isn't a complete disaster of an entire environment or an entire data center, et cetera. But how do I continue it for what's actually more common if I have logical problems? And so we'll talk a little bit about ransomware. What if somebody encrypts all my data and I can't get at it unless I pay a ransom? What if somebody makes a mistake in an upgrade of a major database? These are all the things that we'll call logical errors in the data, as opposed to a physical disaster. And in this, you usually have a primary copy that we talked about. High performance, very reliable. It itself has multiple recovery and redundancy, et cetera. But the second part, where kind of Rubrik is going to kind of get in the middle there, is to say, well, how do I get that data to a second rapidly restorable copy that is also immutable? In other words, if NetApp just simply takes a snapshot of its data, that is not immutable, because if somebody came in and hacked that system for whatever reason, and that has to do with security, not with NetApp, but if they got access to that through the firewall and they were to encrypt it, they would see that there's another copy and they would encrypt that as well. So the second copy needs to be immutable. We look at things about how fast can I recover? If I had to recover, how much would I lose? RPO, RTO, et cetera. And Dale and Pierre will go into that in a lot of detail about how that middle copy is. And then what do I do for compliance? How do I have a very efficient, cost-effective third copy? And usually that's considered the compliance copy. How do I get one off-site, et cetera? So with that as kind of a framework, I'm going to actually hand it over to our technical presenters today, Dale and Pierre, to cover kind of part of the solution.
Thank you, Kent. So my name is Pierre-François Guglielmi, and I'm a manager of strategic global alliances at Rubrik. And actually, I would like to start with what Kent told about previously, which sound to be very modern things for backup and data protection, such as, immutable backups and rapid recovery and high performance and all of that. And if you think about data protection solutions in general, the reputation of what I'm going to call legacy solutions is not to be very modern. And as part of a digital transformation initiative, I really do think that data protection should actually be modernized as well. And so if we take a look at what these legacy data protection solutions used to be, they actually used to be very complex, complicated, because they are siloed. So you can find a lot of components in their architectures, and all of these components, of course, need to be managed, deployed, maintained, sometimes patched, updated, and sometimes, some of these components have a very specific roles in the infrastructure and are not highly available or are not redundant, which creates single points of failure. And all of that is really very complicated to manage. And if you think about things such as what we just discussed in the introduction, like, handling and managing data in a multi-cloud and hybrid cloud environment, well, these solutions, these legacy data protection solutions, were not really made for interacting with the cloud, and especially with the public cloud. Also, when you think about modernizing, oftentimes you think, or at least large organizations want to automate as much as they can to improve their process and save time and save money and get better TCOs. But the problem is that these solutions were not specifically made for being automated or integrated in solutions that would be, global orchestrators, for example. So automation was also quite a pain point. And we were also talking about a compliance copy and immutable backups. So security is also top of mind, especially nowadays with everything that we hear about, ransomware attacks and things like that. And from a security perspective, these solutions were built with security in mind. And so that was also quite of a pain point. So when we started back in 2014 with Rubrik Cloud Data Management, we really wanted to simplify our customers' lives when it comes to data management and data protection. So we decided to converge everything in one single software fabric, as we call it, to make sure that the architecture is highly available, redundant. There's no one component that is more important than another one. And of course, when it comes to scaling out, because customers observe data growth, they are able to very easily grow their data protection solution as their production environment and their data grows as well. And of course, we have the cloud in mind right from the start. So it's really very easy to integrate with the cloud and to leverage, especially the public cloud or the private cloud, to do things that we're going to describe in a couple slides. And with that, I was also talking about automation, which is really top of mind for some organizations. And we wanted to build a platform that would be an API-first platform, an API-first architecture, so that everything in terms of capabilities and functionalities that is available in the solution can be completely automated just by using API calls. And last but not least, we really wanted to make sure that when customers use our solution, our software to back up their data, which is critical, it's the lifeblood of the company, they would actually make sure that they would be able to recover when it's time to recover anything. And to make sure of this, we wanted them to have a solution that would store the data in an immutable format, so that whatever happens, whether it's a ransomware attack or an insider attack or whatever it may be, these backups, this backup data can be used for recoveries, which is extremely important. And the other thing that we wanted to make simpler is not only the architecture, that's one thing, but what's super important on a daily basis is using the solution. And there's, of course, a UI, a user interface, and how to use it, how it's managed. And actually, when you think about these legacy data protection solutions that I was describing, they pretty much all used to use or leverage jobs. And actually, customers have to, create these jobs and configure them and manage the scheduling and make sure that the jobs do not overlap and things like that. And that gets very complicated. So we really wanted to make life easier for our customers. And also, we didn't want them to think about all that and refocus on what really matters, which basically are these four things. So the first one, in terms of data protection, is, of course, my RPOs, my recovery point objectives. So how frequently do I need to back up or to protect any given workload, whether it's a virtual server, an application, database, whatever it may be? How frequently do I need to back that up? Then, what short-term retention do I need on premises? So that would be the first copy for the data protection for rapid recoveries. So that's my short-term retention. Then, do I need any longer-term retention? And if so, how long do I need? And if I need really long-term retention, can I find any kind of secondary storage solution that would help taking my TCO, my total cost of ownership down? So long-term retention is also key for compliance purposes and regulations sometimes. And last but not least, do I need replication for disaster recovery purposes? So we really wanted customers to focus on that and not on jobs. And so with these four main parameters, you can actually create policies instead of jobs. And once you've got your policies created, you can then just apply that to anything that needs to be protected, whether it's virtual, it's physical, it's applications, it's NAS, it's databases, it can be anything really. And of course, as part of these policies, you can also choose to have multiple copies, as we were saying before, and you can choose to have these copies either archived to the cloud, whether it's private or public cloud, or replicated to a disaster recovery site as part of the exact same policy. No more jobs. Now, I'm talking about the cloud and sending data and archival data to the cloud, whether private or public. And if we take a look at our customer's cloud journey, this is what it usually looks like. One of the first and main use cases for leveraging cloud storage specifically, again, whether private or public, is for that long-term retention copy or for compliance purposes. So we do have that as part of our policies, and that's definitely what customers usually do as the first thing when leveraging the public cloud especially. Now, of course, since they are able to send a copy of the backup data to the cloud very easily, once they have that copy in the cloud, what they can do is that they can leverage that copy to maybe do more than just recoveries. And that could be, for example, instantiate from the backups that are in the cloud in the form of native virtual machines, whether it's, Azure VMs or maybe AWS EC2 instances. For doing what? Well, actually for doing things such as maybe migrations. Customers have got some point migrations for some workloads to do. They can absolutely leverage that to do this and to achieve that goal. But they could also do that just for testing purposes or development purposes, for example. Instead of having to rebuild everything from scratch in the cloud, they can just leverage the backup assets that they have sent to the cloud and convert this to native VMs so that they can do whatever tests and development they need to do. Now, of course, when they have workloads and applications running in the cloud, they will most probably need to protect that. And, one common misunderstanding when, migrating or creating applications or workloads in the cloud, in the public cloud especially, is that because my data is in the cloud, it's automatically protected, which is not exactly true. Of course, the cloud provider is responsible for the infrastructure and its availability and the SLAs of the infrastructure, but none of the data. It's really ultimately the customer's responsibility to protect that data. And of course, we can offer that as well. And I was touching on ransomware attacks earlier, and I was saying that it's critical to have something, at least a data protection solution that would offer immutability, which is what we do. But if you think about this more generally, you will see that actually a lot of organizations do not really have, some of them do, but a lot of organizations do not really have a remediation plan in case of a ransomware attack. But what we observe is that there are three things mostly that they will want in case of a ransomware attack. And the question is not if it's going to happen, but when it's going to happen. And so when it's going to happen, what they will want is, of course, probably not paying the ransom, or at least it's not recommended. So they will want to recover from the backups. But of course, they will want to recover as fast as they can. So the RTOs are going to be extremely important here. But before being able to think about rapid recovery, they need to make sure that they can recover from the backups. Because actually, unfortunately, we've heard a lot of stories of different kinds of companies and customers, and maybe sometimes cities, where the ransomware attack actually started to hit not the production data, but the backup data. And if that happens, if there's no backup to recover from, that's a big problem. So we really wanted to make sure that our customers would have an immutable file system to store the backups, so that whenever that kind of things happen, they have a kind of guarantee that they can recover from their own backups. And the third thing that they're going to want is actually to have some visibility. Because if you think about a ransomware attack, maybe it's going to delete or change or encrypt data, whether files or folders or different things, but maybe not everything, maybe not an entire server, or maybe not an entire NAS system. It can be only folders and specific files. But how do you know what to recover? Again, in a matter of rapid recovery, how do you know what to recover if you don't know what's been hit? And so the third thing that they're going to want is actually visibility. And we can provide that with a solution that actually is not here to prevent ransomware attacks, but to alert, detect, and analyze, to give that visibility, so that once we know exactly what has been hit, well, customers can choose in one click to recover only what has been hit. And Dale, over to you.
All right. Hey, thanks, PF. That was a great summary of a lot of the innovation that Rubrik has brought to the market, and I sure appreciate that. As I mentioned before, my name is Dale Hansen. I am the NetApp Technical Partner Manager for Insight, and working with partnerships with Rubrik and Insight on projects just like this. So, as many of you know, NetApp has gone to market with a thing called the NetApp Data Fabric, and NetApp Data Fabric provides a bunch of data services on here. But more importantly, we can run almost our entire product line anywhere you want in the fabric, whether it's at the edge, whether it's at the core, or whether it's at a hybrid model that's up in the cloud. So for those of you that don't know, NetApp's main operating system is called ONTAP, and ONTAP can either run on purpose-built hardware, as you see here in the AFF and FAS storage arrays. We can also run out on the edge in something called ONTAP Select, and that, how I remember that, is that you're able to select your hardware. So that means it's a virtual machine that's running out there. There's a couple other ways to run ONTAP, whether it's in the cloud, or whether you run it as cloud volumes in any of our big cloud partners, whether that's Azure, Amazon, Google, any of those pieces here. So whether you're working on the edge to core to the cloud, as the slide shows here, we run across all of that in a data fabric story. And a lot of that is going to be managed by something called NetApp Project Astra. So this is a modification of the Kubernetes as a service offering that's going to allow you to do a bunch of automation and management of that product, no matter where you choose to run it in the cloud. So one of the biggest parts, though, that we have of our data fabric story, of course, is protection and archival. And on this slide here, you'll see that the simplified protection leads to an automated lifecycle. And NetApp doesn't do that very well, so we've made some partnerships. And Rubrik is definitely one of those partners that's using our their policy-based automation tools that allows us to start from NetApp primary storage. However you're backing that up, whether it's with snapshots or clones, whatever application you're integrating with, whether it's whether it's a virtual machine-based system or SQL Server, any databases, or just plain old operating systems as well. You can do that with the policies on here. And finally, all that data can end up in a hybrid cloud flexibility. And that hybrid cloud flexibility can put things either in the cloud or on-prem. So the next slide here shows a little bit, we can dig into now exactly what a modern approach is, exactly how this works. And it's just, enterprise backup, as PF talked about here. But it's a very quick start. It's simple to set up. You've got some automated discovery pieces in here that make it much easier to use. The policy automation, too, it's very intelligent for the policy engine. No jobs, no tasks, no schedules. You just set up a policy, and the Rubrik engine will take care of the rest of it. And it also has some very instant recovery pieces at the different tiers that we talked about here, whether you are live mounting a virtual machine, whether you're recovering a SQL database, Oracle database, very fast search and restore for individual files. So there's a great way to get things started and how you can get that going. The next piece is that it is, built for the cloud and designed with cloud in mind right off the bat. So the first thing is that it's an API first. An API first means we integrate with the third party of your choice. You can automate these end-to-end workflows at scale. No matter what automation tool that you're supporting or working with, we're going to be there because it's full REST APIs. And a lot of the NetApp products we talked about as far as primary storage also work with APIs. They got their start as a service provider type solution, born in the cloud kind of a thing, and they definitely are full API support on that one. The next one is cloud native, and what that means is that you're going to have some instant access. It's a Google-like search for your cloud pieces on there, and it also allows you for some very rapid recovery and file level recovery too. So it's also going to protect your cloud native apps and be able to have that level of recovery in there too, built from the cloud. Finally, built for security. And as we talked about here, the ransomware piece is a lot of it, but there's more to it than just that. It's end-to-end encryption. It's whether it's at rest or in flight. That means we've got some also native immutability against ransomware, like PF described, and we'll get into a little more later. And also, there's a artificial intelligence angle to this, where they're actually looking to, recognize and detect any anonymous behavior that is that's going on in here. So there's a great recovery capability to that as well, as we talked about before. So, all right. So NetApp StorageGRID, that's the destination, the S3 destination that we talk about. And this is when Rubrik's policy engines would send something off to the cloud to an S3 bucket, or there's a lot of times when you actually need to send something to on-prem, whether it's for regulatory, maybe it's PCI compliance in retail, maybe it's HIPAA compliance for medical records, maybe you've got GDPR concerns in different countries. So what NetApp StorageGRID allows you to do is have that S3 bucket on-prem, and also it's geo-redundant. So you can have a multi-site geo-redundant place. So that's a further protection against disaster recovery. It supports multiple protocols here. It's got durable, low-cost cloud storage for active archiving, and definitely allows you to have multiple copies from multiple apps across the world here. The next part of it, though, is that it can also be a huge data lake. So you can say a user would ingest this, maybe start the path here where you ingest some data in San Francisco, get to StorageGRID site, and the user wants to read that data in Tokyo finally. What's going to happen is that you can have multiple sites in here as it skips its way across these multiple geographies. And you can have huge capacities, multiple sites, and hundreds of billions of objects. So it's a huge global data lake for any big data applications or any of the backup archive stuff like we're talking about today. So it's a pretty powerful solution in general, and specifically for the NetApp Rubrik partnership. All right. As I mentioned before, a lot of this stuff came from a service provider-based background, and the group that's doing this is fully automated, fully support of all the RESTful APIs to automate your IT service delivery. You can see the list of different partners that we work with there that's going to allow you to do that and work with the Rubrik APIs, working into the NetApp APIs that we support on that one. So you can do all kinds of automation on there, whether we're automating VM provisioning, test dev environments, any of those kinds of file recoveries, customized reporting, all of those different tools are available there too. All right, and with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Pierre.
Thank you, Dale. So I really wanted to touch on especially NAS backup, because when you think about data growth, actually unstructured data represents an amount of data which is enormous. And when you think about data protection of this kind of data, it can be really challenging when you think about it. Because actually, not only it's oftentimes large data sets, so like billions of files for some NAS systems, and very large amounts of data, so up to petabytes sometimes. But also it can be heterogeneous easily in customers' environments, where some customers may have multiple NAS systems from different vendors and different models. And one of the problems with that is that over the past 20 years or so, these NAS data sets used to be backed up with something that we call NDMP, which is a protocol for data protection that actually moves the data from the NAS to historically tape, whether physical or virtual. And unfortunately, that protocol came with a few drawbacks and caveats. And for example, one of them is that protocol does not define any standard for the backup format, which means that each vendor used to have its own implementation of the protocol with its own backup format, which doesn't make the data very mobile or very portable. So moving data from one specific NAS to another one can be extremely difficult to do. And on top of that, that protocol used to be quite slow because technically speaking, it used to be a single stream protocol. So no parallel processing to improve backup performance. So we really wanted to have something that would be faster, easier, and that would make data more portable, definitely. So we implemented something that just uses, industry standard protocols, namely SMB or NFS for the cloud protocols, to backup NAS, which is great because actually we have a lot less requirements and restrictions when backing up NAS. But to improve the backup of very large NAS data sets, and of course, especially of NetApp NAS systems, we actually partner with NetApp to introduce our integration and support of the SnapDiff APIs. So the SnapDiff APIs are some NetApp proprietary and closed APIs, which Rubrik has been allowed to leverage and to use in our product, Rubrik Cloud Data Management. And the goal of this is really to make sure that when backing up large data sets and when doing incremental backups of large NetApp NAS systems, we would actually rely on that API that actually sits on the NetApp host to give us the list of what has changed since the previous backup. So we don't have to scan to identify the changes. And if we don't have to scan to do that, we actually save a lot of time because we get the list of changes much more quickly. And so we can start fetching the new data much faster as well. So we ultimately save a lot of time overall on the backup windows, which ultimately means for the customers in terms of benefits that they may be able to back up their critical data on NetApp NAS systems more frequently, which results in better recovery point objectives or RPOs. So that's extremely important for environments where the unstructured data has grown exponentially. Backup windows is a real challenge. Over to you, Dale.
All right, thanks, PF. One more piece on our NetApp StorageGRID piece here. It's basically all the unstructured data, all the backup data that you have at scale, and it can be massive geographies. It's open via all the APIs we have, so you can future-proof your investments. You can deliver differentiated service levels using the Rubrik policy engine as an integrated part of the NetApp data fabric you can see there. And it's very extensible because you can go to either the public cloud, multi-cloud, or NetApp's private cloud. So I guess to summarize here then, it's been a great partnership. Rubrik and StorageGRID, NetApp StorageGRID coming together can definitely, as I stated, our goal to start with, simplify your data lifecycle management, at scale with policy-based simplicity, cost-effective scale, and cloud mobility as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, gentlemen. That was really great. So I have a couple questions I'd like to ask the group. First up, according to Cybersecurity Ventures, a new organization will fall victim to ransomware every 11 seconds by 2021. What's going on here, and is this accurate? And in other words, how serious is ransomware? Pierre, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so unfortunately and sadly, that's very true. And it's even more mind-blowing, I would even say, to hear that statistic, which is one new ransomware attack every 11 seconds by 2021, especially when you know that in 2019, I think it was one new attack every 39 seconds. So it means that that's definitely true, and it grows just exponentially. So we are seeing and hearing more and more ransomware attack stories. If you just Google something like ransomware CDOF and you just stop there, you will find, unfortunately, a lot of different stories from ransomware attacks in some very well-known cities in the US, for example. that were hit by ransomware. So that's a sad reality.
Okay, thanks, Pierre. Dale, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, we're seeing this as a much more and more frequent occurrence and a much more serious problem. And it goes beyond, a lot of NetApp's built-in native protections we've accidentally had for years, like snapshots and flex clones and other features that NetApp offers in its ONTAP operating system have in the past been effective in stopping some of the ransomware pieces because there is a backup copy that they might not know about or are unable to get to. But now they're becoming more and more sophisticated. These attacks are starting to go after, they do understand that they're running on a specific file system, and they do go after your snapshot copies, and they do go after some of the clones and some of the other backup capabilities that we have. So NetApp has been working closely with a product that we've had for immutable data stuff for a long time, and that's called SnapLock, and we're able to protect some of that again. But once again, it's even more important to have a truly, totally immutable backup product from Rubrik that will make that solution hopefully add another level of protection to what the ransomware people are working on.
Okay, great. And Kent, what are your thoughts here?
Well, I think Dale and Pierre did a great job of answering the question. From our perspective, it's great that they came up with a statistic of 11 seconds. In reality, from our, unless a client reaches out and says, I have a problem, public companies are not going to make that information public because it's embarrassing. As Pierre pointed out, I was looking at, what was the city again that got hacked? And when I did a Google, I found many cities, and they have to be public. So those are the ones that are well documented when a public entity like a city or has to pay a ransomware. But private companies and public companies, it's hard to actually determine that data, but it's certainly top of mind. One of the things, 5 years ago, we kind of thought backup was just that thing you had to have. And it was incredibly complicated, as Pierre brought up. It's very important now. It's what we call cool again.
Right, more than cool, right? Necessary. So clearly there's a need to pay attention to this. What kind of advice would we offer, best practices? Pierre, let's start with you again.
Yeah, so my first advice would be for, companies that do not have a remediation plan for ransomware attacks yet, that they should start thinking about it right now. And, thinking about a remediation plan would start with making sure that they have a good backup that is recoverable, so preferably stored on immutable storage, that they just also follow, standard rules of data protection, such as the 3-2-1 rule, just like what we've said since the beginning of that webcast, with multiple copies, So usually the rule, that 3-2-1 rule, says that for data protection, customers should have 3 copies of the data on 2 different types of media, one being offsite. And of course, you add up to this the immutability that we talked about. And once you get that, make sure that you can recover quickly, as fast as possible, to have short RTOs, recovery time objectives, to make sure that, the production and the data is up and running as fast as possible. And the last thing that I would say is also try to implement solutions that would give you visibility over what a given ransomware attack would have hit or encrypted or infected.
Okay, excellent. Dale, why don't you share your thoughts?
Yeah, to finish up, Rubrik and NetApp both provide a suite of tools that will allow you to protect yourself from ransomware. But it really comes down to great partners like Insight that we have that are going to be able to provide a coordinated effort to do a security audit, to go over best practices, to be sure that, whatever protections that you have in place are being followed, or policies are being followed, whether that's from a managed service or professional services engagement. Like I said, we provide great tools for this, but we really rely on our partners to put the whole solution together.
Okay, excellent. And Ken, any last thoughts on best practices or advice you would offer?
Yeah, Barbara, I think it has brought up a whole new, it's not new, subject of rapid restore, and now considered hyper rapid restore. So when somebody said, do you have a backup? If it took him all day to get something onto a piece of tape and he put it under his desk, he could usually check the box. And now that's a new world. So 2 concepts, your recovery time. If you lost all your data at 10 a.m., how long would it take you to restore? That's where rapid restore became critical, as opposed to, well, if I'm up by tomorrow, that's fine. And then if I lost all my data at 10 a.m., how much data would I lose? In other words, when's the last time Rubrik took snap of the differential data? That's your recovery point. All of a sudden, those two things became much more critically in focus than they were before something like ransomware made that so relevant.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, gentlemen. That was a great discussion. Thank you to my guests, Kent Christensen of Insight, Dale Hansen of NetApp, and Pierre Guglielmi of Rubrik. For additional information on this topic, please visit the resources section on your screen. And if you have any additional questions, please use the question widget on the screen and someone will get back to you as soon as possible. And thanks for joining us. For IDG, Insight, NetApp, and Rubrik, I'm Barbara Call.